Ay, kumusta mga kaibigan? Welcome back to Buhay Balo, and it's your host, Xian again, or Alexi, whatever you want to call me. So, today this video is going to be a bit different because today this is going to be a what if video on, what if this happened. This time it's basically fictional. So, I'm back on Squid Game, and I do recommend you watch the previous Squid Game videos I did do a while back. But anyway, into the video. So, this what if video is gonna be what if player 456 or Song Gi-hun's daughter, Song Ga-young, ended up in the Squid Games. So, I only said this to my mother, so, but I thought this would be a pretty good idea that I would assimilate more, and, so that way I can get your thoughts on how, interesting this story could be. Anyway, on to the video. So, for Ga-young to end up in the Squid Game, we'd have to have her end up in debt, or the Squid Game would bribe her into going into the games. So, and basically this is going to be the frontman's way to test Gi-hun's morality, because I'm pretty sure some of you might think this could be a bit out of character for the frontman to put a child in the game, but in season 3, he literally was fine with putting Junhee's baby in the game as a player. But that was to save her child though. But anyway, so let's say that all the way in America, Ga-young is having a bit of a rough life. The fact that she hasn't heard of her father in the past 2 years, well, 3, or I don't know. Anyway, so one day, the recruiter goes to America to recruit Gi-hun's daughter as a player, but instead he decides that he should make he'll bribe her instead. And he said, so he's gonna be saying, the salesman, "Hello, miss. Would you like to play a game of dakji so you can win some money?" And then, of course, well, Ga-young being a child, she probably wouldn't trust the recruiter, but seeing the money, she'd be tempted, and then she'd play dakji with him. And then, of course, the salesman does his classic thing, and he'd tell her about a lot of things in her life, and he gave her the card so that way she could go in the Squid Games as a player. Moving on. So, Gi-hun still ends up in the Squid Game as player 456, and then Ga-young ends up in the games as player 132. In case you guys don't know, the reason why I chose that number is because that was the number of the frontman when he was first in the Squid Games. Anyway, moving on. So Ga-young questions about the whole game system, and then when she goes to ask, the entire room is just filled with shock and disbelief, and they start questioning, "Yo, dude, why would you put a child in these games? What if she were to fall and get hurt or something? Aren't you guys accountable for that?" Yeah. But then the guards are basically just so secretive that they say, "The child is here for personal reasons, and in here you are all equal regardless of race, gender, or age." Yeah. So Gi-hun, recognizing the voice, eventually identifies as the little kid is his daughter. And then after they sign, Gi-hun notices Ga-young and drags her to somewhere a bit more private. Ga-young is then shocked and then she says, "Dad, is that you? What are you doing here?" And then Gi-hun and says, "That's what I was gonna ask you. Why are you here?" And of course Ga-young explains the whole thing and all that, at the salesman recruiting her, and then, so Gi-hun, and knowing the situation, he decides that he's going to protect her, and then of course Jung-bae finds Gi-hun and Ga-young as well, and the same thing happens. Gi-hun and tells everyone that they have to listen to him because he knows what's gonna happen, and then all that stuff. So So then, I'm gonna ask you, why are you here? And of course, Guyong explains the whole thing and all that at the salesman recruiting her, and then, So Gihun, and knowing the situation, he decides that he's going to protect her. And then, of course, Jongbei finds Gihun and Gayong as well. And the same thing happens. Gihun and tells everyone that they have to listen to him because he knows what's gonna happen. And then, all that stuff. So then, and as player 196 Kang Mina dies, Jongbei and Gayong join Gihun as they follow him. And then after the first game, Gayong questions Gihun about the whole thing along with Jongbei. And then after that, the voting begins. And of course naman, ang Gihun and votes to leave along with Jongbei and Gayong. And of course, the frontman still is a player and he still votes to stay. Yeah, so Daeho still joins Gihun's team, and the frontman still beats up Thanos and Namgyu for picking on Myunggi. So as the second game begins, Junhee still joins the team, but someone would need to get the boot, and basically Jongbei is the one that chooses to leave. Yeah. And Jongbei teams up with Hyunju, Yongsik, Gyumja, and Youngmi. And then, everyone celebrates, everyone still survives, and this time Gayong takes a flying stone, and Daeho still does Gongi, and the frontman still saves Gihun. And then after that, they all survive, and after that, Jongbei invites Hyunju, Gyumja, Youngmi, and Yongsik to join him and Gihun's team. And of course naman, they all introduce themselves and all that. And then the voting begins, and this time Jongbei still votes X, now knowing Gihun's daughter's in the game, and he does not want to risk Gayong's life all for the sake of money. And of course, a lot of people still vote to continue the game, and then classic Gihun and the frontman, or Young Il by his fake name, they try to convince everyone that they should stop, and they also say that there's also a child in the game and they shouldn't be betting on a child's life all for the sake of money. But player 100 still is saying one more game, all that stuff, and the majority still votes to continue the games. Yeah. And then of course, in when everyone's about to go to sleep, Jongbei and Gayong all have a heart-to-heart moment with Gihun, while Hyunju, Gyumja, and Junhee still have a heart-to-heart moment in the bathroom. So, but back to Gihun, Gayong, and Jongbei. After Jongbei and Gihun were done talking, Gayong decides to join in on the conversation, and she goes to ask about what her father had been through for the past years. So Gihun explains that he first went to the game so he could pay for his mother's treatment, but it was eventually in vain. And like Jongbei, Gayong also questions why he went through this whole thing again, and said that if I were you, Dad, I would have just forgotten about this whole thing and then just made a new life with all the prize money. But then of course Gihun says, say I died right in front of you, could you ever let that go? Nope, I don't think so. Yeah. Anyway, that stuff naman. And then of course, and Gihun makes a promise to Gayong that once they both get out, he'll go and buy fried chicken and tteokbokki, kind of like how he did kind of promise to do back in season 1. Anyway, so on to the third game, so Mingle. So everything still goes along. Gayong and Gihun, no matter what had happened, they would always make sure to stay together, basically, and all that. And anyway, after the mingle game, in the voting still begins and everything still plays out of you. Could you ever let that go? Nope, I don't think so. Yeah. Anyway, you know that stuff naman. And then of course, and Gihon makes a promise to Gayong that once they both get out, he'll go and buy fried chicken and tteokbokki, kind of like how he did kind of promise to do back in season 1. Anyway, so on to the third game. So mingle. So everything still goes along. Gayong and Gihon, and no matter what had happened, they would always make sure to stay together. Basically and all that, and Anyway, after the mingle game, in the voting still begins and everything still plays out the same. Myunggi, he still fights Thanos and still kills him with a fork, and Gihon still starts the rebellion and it still ultimately fails. But now on to season 3. So Gayong is shocked to find her father in a coffin and finds out and asks if he's dead, but luckily he has a sigh of relief from her as he hears from Hyunju that Gihon's still alive. Then as Gihon wakes up, Gayong embraces her father and says she's happy to see him. And of course Gihon is still suicidal, like he still wants to end his life. Anyway, Gihon definitely still becomes bloodlusted, but this time but still he's not so. But the thing is, despite Gihon still broken, and Gayong is still there for him, and despite it seeing him as sort of dead inside, Gayong's still willing to comfort her father, and despite Gihon still being broken, he still gives his time for his daughter, and basically he's determined to making sure that his daughter survives and all that. So basically he's he is a lot more vengeful and violent, like how he was in the OG timeline of season 3, but he is a bit more merciful because his daughter is still alive. He's still mad at Daeho, so he still kills him off in the hide and seek game. So Gihon still chooses red and Gayong chooses blue. So she sticks alongside Hyunju, Yongja, and Junhee, and of course she's still there as the baby is being born, and is there to witness as Myunggi kills Hyunju, and instead of Yongja killing Young-sik as he tries to kill Junhee, it's Gayong that eventually ends up saving Junhee by holding Young-sik until he eventually pushes her off, and then after that, Gyumja stabs Young-sik in the back, and then the guards kill him off. Gihon still tries to take his life, but and all that. And like in the original series, Gyumja still tries to convince everyone to leave, but of course they don't. Trying to say that there's 2 kids in these games and we need to get them out, but of course they don't listen. Anyway, Gyumja gives Gihon the much needed support and help he needs to finally be able to keep fighting for his daughter and for Junhee's baby. And as he still feels like he failed Gayong as a father, he's still willing to protect her as much as he can. And of course, Gyumja still ends her own life, and Gihon still has that heart-to-heart moment with Junhee. And of course, Gihon still carries Junhee's baby across the bridge in jump rope, with Gayong following along in behind him, and still fights player 96, and Junhee still commits suicide. And then after that, and then of course the frontman still makes the baby a player, and they still try to kill it later on. And then Gayong, with her father, does her best to keep the baby safe until the guards stop it. And then they all have one all vote X, while in Jongdae, player 100, in Jongdae, player 203, Kim Gi-min, and player 333, Lee Myung-gi, they all vote O along with the rest. The frontman still gives Gi-hun the proposition to kill off all the players so he can leave with Junhee's baby and his daughter. So he says, "Take this knife back to your quarters and kill off anyone who tries to hurt you or harm the baby or your daughter." And of course, everything still plays out. The frontman still reveals his face to Gi-hun and still asks player 456, "Do you still have faith in people?" Anyway, on to the final game. So Min-soo still dies, and Gi-hun is on the defensive, protecting Junhee's baby and Gayong. And then he also uses that same trick again, that if that one guy pushes the three of them off, they'll have to choose someone else to die in the next round. And Myung-gi turns on the O players and they take down on all of them. And like before, Myung-gi turns on Gi-hun and he says, "I'll tell you what, I'll sacrifice myself and you can save yourself and your child and my daughter. I'll sacrifice myself only on one condition: you keep your child and my daughter alive." So he does that, and then, well, okay, anyway. So as Gi-hun is left on the final platform, Gayong, Myung-gi, and the baby all make it to the final platform, as Myung-gi is planning to push Gayong off so he can leave with the baby. But then, at the last moment, Gi-hun did the most epic thing ever, jump to another platform, and still fights with 333, and this time, his life is saved by Gayong, as once the button arrives, Gayong presses the button in time, which saves Gi-hun, and then in the end, she helps her father get back up, and then the voice says, "Player 333 eliminated, player 456, player 132, player 222 victorious," or pass. I don't know. Anyway, Junho still finds them, and of course still asks Inho, why did you do it? So Inho gets them to safety and drops them off, and then Junho finds them all, and then they find all the prize money getting divided by the three of them, and then in the end they all finally made it out alive, and the day is saved. Well, sort of. Anyway, so we'll fast forward 6 months later. So Gi-hun was finally able to get legal custody over his daughter, and now she lives back in Korea, and now Woo Seok is out of prison, and then he introduces his daughter and the baby to Junho and Woo Seok, and they all become best friends along with that guy Woo Seok was with. So happy ending for everyone, until Gi-hun and Gayong decide to take a vacation to America, only to then find the American recruiter playing Dakji with a homeless man, and this is and then he stares out of the window and then leaves, and that's the end for Squid Game season 3. I gotta tell you, this I think would have been a very interesting thing to see, and also this was I kind of in a way just wrote the ending for Squid Game season 3 as many of the fans wanted it to end. Okay, I mean, I did have the idea with saying Gi-hun still dies to sacrifice himself for his daughter, but I thought, you know what, let's give Gi-hun the happy ending he deserves, because after all he's been through, he really deserved this ending. Anyway, that's the end for this video. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below, And don't forget to like and subscribe. And I will see you on the next episode of Buhay Balo. Bye!